What have we got here?
I got one last thing, and this was mainly for you, Dave, because I actually had a question that I wanted to ask you once we actually kind of go through the news report. But Among Us, of all games, has added Irish localization, a cultural win for a thriving minority language. The Monster Hit game received a new update a couple of days ago, which brought with it Irish localization. Among Us is perhaps the biggest game ever to receive an Irish localization, although it is not the first. This was kind of spearheaded by Una Min Kavanagh, who worked alongside Kavanagh. Sorry, I will get my Irish pronunciations at some point. It was kind of there was a mod, and it officially got added to the game late last year, or now, I guess. So my big question, I guess, for you, Dave, like you are, a man that speaks Irish to some degree. Theoretically, you got taught it at least, and can, spring out the words and sentences when you need to.
I at one time could speak Irish quite well. Yes.
Yeah. Irish in video games, like, is that? How much of a thing is that, or has been, or just has not been? Like, what is your kind of experiences with it?
Like, I suppose that the starting point would be for people to understand where Irish sits contemporary in the contemporary culture, and that is very much, as that story mentions, a minority language. There are only a couple of pockets in the entire country for which Irish is the primary spoken language in the Gaeltacht regions, and the population in those areas are quite small. So you're talking maybe like a few thousand people. Like, I don't have exact figures, but you're talking maybe a few thousand people in the whole country who communicate primarily through Irish. Outside of that, like there are two ways in which a lot of us interact with the language, and that is one, as you've alluded to, we are taught it in school from the start of primary school to the end of secondary. Unless you have an exemption for a learning difficulty, you are required to learn Irish until you are 18 in school. And that gives people a bit of a fraught and contentious relationship sometimes with it as they get older, and the idea that they can't opt into the language. But I think a lot of the history of making it a compulsory subject is tied to the fear of it being lost as a living spoken language.
Which is the case with a lot of like minority languages.
Yes. So I completely understand both sides of that, where I understand people who are frustrated that they have to learn it, but I also understand some of the reasoning behind why you would be afraid to make it an elective language, because it might do more harm than good to the actual culture. Something about our language as well is that it's tied up very considerably with our cultural identity, and this idea that, and I'm about to give the Brits a battering here, lads, so batten down the hatches for a second. This will be one of those times where Jack claims to be a son of Clare instead of anything to do with the country
absolutely
he lives in.
Robbed by Tipperary in the fucking hurling last week, but we won't go on to that.
It's one of those things that when we were invaded and conquered, and when the penal laws came in, which were these punitive measures to try and stamp out Irish culture and make us British citizens, one of the things we were legally forbidden from doing was speaking Irish at any time. So there has always been to some an overstated value put into the Irish language because of that period where because of it being the attempt to stamp it out, it became more tied to our identity than it would have if the thing had naturally worn out and we had chosen to start speaking English instead. You know what I mean? So over my lifetime, there has been considerable progress in like Irish revival. One of the first times I noticed it growing up was when a lot of the words I would learn in Irish growing up were anglicized, or were Irish versions of fairly anglicized words. But as I was going through school, people were coming in and going, no, we have developed actually, or we are trying to get you to learn more actual legitimately Irish versions of these words, rather than something like in primary school we would have been taught that the word car was car in Irish, whereas we get to secondary school it's like no, that's anglicised, we want to call them Glühstein instead, things like that. So when the segment of the population that campaigns for the revival of the language or its positioning as equal to any other spoken language, when they make a bit of progress, it's fantastic. I remember there was a big to-do around the time that we would have all been in secondary school where the Harry Potter books got Irish translations. That was a huge fucking deal at the time. We have an all Irish language television station that's on like Freeview, that TG Cahir, which is like, you know, it has gotten many plaudits over the years. They have a great social media account as well, I will say, for any Irish people listening to this that don't follow them. Their social media, as far as one of those kind of self-aware brands goes, is pretty good. I'm happy about Among Us or any game getting Irish localization for two reasons. One, because it is a major sign of kind of validation of that language for the people who still speak it a lot and speak it more eloquently than I do at this point, obviously. And from the other side of things, as somebody who was a teacher at one point in my life, I see this as a tool. That it is a way to make Irish more accessible and more practical to students trying to learn it. One of the problems that a lot of people have with the way Irish is taught in school is that it is very much, we're learning our verbs off by heart. It's repetition, and there's no element of practicality or conversationalism to the way we learn it until way towards the end when we have to start doing oral exams in our foreign languages in secondary school.
And I would say that Among Us, which a large portion of that game is based around conversation and dialogue,
yes,
is a pretty good game, good tool to use.
Yeah, so we used to have really dodgy, like, kind of like, do you remember the foreign language tape sets, the Muzzy, where you'd learn French or Italian or whatever through these cartoons that the BBC put out, like dubbed into the different languages.
Yeah.
So there was an Irish one of that, and then there'd be like dodgy kind of MS-DOS or Windows 98 era games that would be put into Irish for you to try and learn, and they were just kind of like, they, even by the time we were coming through, felt really outdated. So it's really cool that now you could bring a class to a language lab in a school, knock on all the PCs, and go, look, you can play Among Us like you like to play at home, but here's the one rule. The localization is in Irish, so you have to figure out how to use all the menus in Irish, and you can only speak on the game in Irish. I think that's a really helpful educational tool. So I'm really happy about this. Like, I don't think this is going to necessarily create a domino effect where you're going to see like FIFA next year will be available in Irish or anything like that. Much as I would love it. But I do think it's important and it's useful, and congratulations to Una Minkavna and anybody else that was trying to like petition for more games like this to get Irish localization.
God damn, that was interesting, Dave. Thanks very much for that.
Sorry, yeah.
Stay tuned next week, folks, for more.
It's one of those things where I don't think it's appropriate to weigh in for me to weigh in without giving the context that I have from a life spent with this language.
Man, I loved it. It was anyone would think that you'd done a lot of history in your past.
I know, yeah, that maybe I taught it in schools once.
Yes, exactly.
Upon a time. Yeah. But yeah, that's my take on it. I don't know if I'll necessarily rush out to play Among Us in Irish myself, having forgotten most of it and not really playing Among Us that much anymore since I'm back in work physically and the young people don't want to play it online now. That we're out and about, but yeah, it's cool.
Man, if you get a more balanced and educated take on Among Us being translated into Irish anywhere else, holy shit, I don't think that will exist. Maybe Danny O'Dwyer might be able to match it, but he won't best it.
Yeah, Waterford's own.